You did it. Yeah. We can go sit down. Om tapasataamratam tapta jivanam kavivaridhitam kalmashalaham Sarvanamangalam Shrivadatatam Bhuvivananti Purirajana. Your words are like nectar, bringing life to scorched souls. They are praised by poets and remove all sin. They are auspicious to hear, wonderful and exalted. Those who spread these words throughout the world are truly giving souls. Welcome, everyone, to our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We're starting a new chapter, chapter 12, the festival at Pānihāti. Monday, June 18th, 1883. Sri Ramakrishna had been invited to the great religious festival at Pānihāti near Calcutta. This is on the western bank, north of Kalarmat. Yeah, just a few miles, not very far. And Thakur went there almost every year. I don't know when he first started going. And the last time he went was when he kind of caught cold and was a little bit annoyed at Ram and others. Why did they let him go? And it rained that day. And after that, the throat cancer started to come. Yeah. And somehow in the beginning, he thought maybe that was why. Why do I have this scratchy feeling in my throat? It was after that Pānihāti, that time. Yeah. So Sri Ramakrishna had been invited to the great religious festival at Pānihāti near Calcutta. This festival of the flattened rice was inaugurated by Raghunath Das, a disciple of Sri Chaitanya. He was one of the 6 Goswamis. There's Sanatana and Rup and the others. The main disciples of Chaitanya Deva, who wrote the literature and he sent them to Vrindavan and they established temples and things there. They were all very important. It is said that Raghunath used to run away from home, secretly practice his devotions, and enjoy the bliss of spiritual ecstasy. One day Nityananda said to him, "Thief, you run away from home and enjoy the love of God all alone. You hide it from us. I shall punish you today. You must arrange a religious festival and entertain the devotees with flattened rice." So it's not much of a punishment. It's a very simple thing. Flattened rice, it'll be something like puffed rice also. It'll just be a little snack for everyone. Since then, the festival has been annually celebrated at Pānihāti by the Vaishnavas. The Vaishnavas, particularly those of the Chaitanya school. Thousands of the followers of Sri Chaitanya participate in it. Its chief feature is the singing of the names and glories of God and the dancing of the devotees in religious fervor. The center of this festivity is the temple of Radha Krishna, built on the bank of the Ganges. The master had been invited to the festival by Mani Sen, who was the custodian of the temple. Ram, M., Rakal, Bhavanath, and a few other disciples went with the master in a carriage. On his way to Pānihāti, Sri Ramakrishna was in a light mood and joked with the youngsters. But as soon as the carriage reached the place of the festival, the master, to the utter amazement of the devotees, shot into the crowd. He joined the kirtan party of Navadvip Goswami, Mani Sen's guru, and danced, totally forgetting the world. Every now and then, he stood still in samadhi, carefully supported by Navadvip Goswami, for fear he might fall to the ground. This was a common occurrence for Sri Ramakrishna. We associate him mostly with Divine Mother Kali. But he used to say that whoever he was with, he would get into that mood. If he was with the Vaishnavas, he would get into that mood. If he was with worshippers of Shiva or with the non-dualists, whatever. But the Vaishnava tradition was something special with him because he grew up in a Vaishnava family. It wasn't the same type of Vaishnava family. They were worshippers of Rama. They were worshippers of Rama, which was a little bit different from the followers of Gauranga, of Chaitanya Deva, and who really formed a whole community unto themselves, a little bit separate from everyone else. And Thakur in the beginning, it's very interesting. He didn't seem to know that much about Chaitanya Deva. Yeah, and he made some interesting statements in the beginning. He said, was he really such a great soul, or was he set up by these Vaishnava fellows and the worship and everything like that? And he was curious about it. Then when he went to Navadvip, yeah, and he had no experience there, and he thought, how strange. Then he was in a boat, and then he had this vision of the two golden complexion young boys, Chaitanya Deva and Nityananda, Nimai and Nitai, and they had this theory that the course of the river had changed a little bit, and when it was on the bank of the river had moved. So anyhow, he wasn't standing in exactly the place where everything that the Leela took place before. And then when he was in that area, anyhow, after that, he became greatly devoted and became convinced that Chaitanya Deva was an avatar also. And so many instances of Thakur going into ecstasy at the time of kirtan. We hear about all the songs being sung. There's all the songs, the Ram Prasad songs to the Divine Mother and everything, but there's something special about this kirtan done by the Vaishnavas, because they really masters at the singing and dancing and playing the instruments, and it's really a fascinating thing to see. Thakur used to say that I think they had a week-long festival or something in Sham Bazaar, near Fridoy's place, near Kamarpukur. What is it called? Shambazar, Fulia Shambazar, something. Anyhow, where the rumor was that a man had died 8 times and come back to life. That means it had the samadhi. And so day and night he was in an ecstatic state, and people were climbing the walls and roofs just to look at him and everything. So this was something that was not at all uncommon and shouldn't have been unexpected. And every year when he went to this Pānihāti, he would do that, just singing and dancing the whole time. It would be exhausting for him. I went once to one of these types of festivals. Yeah, in near Dhaka, Shavar, in Tulsi's hometown. We went every year. They have, I think it's 8 straight days of kirtan, nonstop. And it's really fascinating to see that people really get into a fervor with this dancing and then the circle and everything, and singing and dancing. So Thakur really, it's hard to believe that he could be exactly like the most devout Vaishnava at the time of attending this type of festival, and then other times everything is mother. How he could switch back and forth like a chameleon, it's really hard to imagine, but he had that ability, and it was natural. He didn't have to do anything. He would be in that, with those people in that place and with that atmosphere, and he would go into that mood. So he would become the main attraction of the whole thing. There'd be thousands of people, but just really to see him. So he joined the kirtan party of Navadvip Goswami, Manisen's guru, and danced, totally forgetting the world. Every now and then he stood still in samadhi, carefully supported by Navadvip Goswami, for fear he might fall to the ground. Thousands of devotees were gathered together for the festival. Wherever one looked, there was a forest of human heads. The crowd seemed to become infected by the master's divine fervor and swayed to and fro, chanting the name of God, until the very air seemed to reverberate with it. Drums, cymbals, and other instruments produced melodious sounds. The atmosphere became intense with spiritual fervor. Now remember that this is the time when all the Brahmas were coming to him, and they seemed so dry to him. He praised them, of course, for uh, whatever spiritual attitude they had and everything, but really, he said that they didn't learn to taste the joy that of this type of kirtan and everything. The devotees felt that Gauranga himself was being manifested in the person of Sri Ramakrishna. They even though Keshav and the others, the Brahmos, they didn't care for any of this stuff at all. Still, they tried to say at one point that Keshav was Gauranga and Shivnath was Nityananda, something like that, to identify them. So one time they were talking about that, and Keshav and Thakur was there and pointed to him and said, "Well, what about him?" Then Thakur said, "I am the dust of your feet. I am the servant of your servant," something like that. But Swamiji used to say, many times I heard Thakur say, he himself was manifest all three: Dvaita, Nityananda, Chaitanya. So these are the main figures there. Now Thakur used to talk about this in a symbolic sense also. Nityananda. So this, if we have this non-dual reality, that we have that realization, then we'll get this Chaitanya, this awakening of some divine ecstatic consciousness, and the Nityananda will be in eternal bliss. So he used to use it in that sense also, but Thakur, when he would go into these moods, he would feel this sense of identification. Of course, he always used to say with Rama and with Krishna, but also with Gauranga. So yeah, he had the firm conviction that Gauranga was also an avatar. The devotees felt that Gauranga himself was being manifested in the person of Sri Ramakrishna. Flowers were showered from all sides on his feet and head. The shouting of the name of Hari was heard even at a distance, like the rumbling of the ocean. Sri Ramakrishna entered by turn into all the moods of ecstasy. In deep samadhi, he stood still, his face radiating a divine glow. In the state of partial consciousness, he danced, sometimes gently and sometimes with the vigor of a lion. Again, regaining consciousness of the world, he sang himself, leading the chorus. This is the traditional explanation of the different states of that Chaitanya Deva himself used to experience. That sometimes he would be lost in ecstasy, sometimes in some ecstatic mood dancing, other times a little bit on the ordinary plane of consciousness, but of course filled with devotion. So Thakur is singing the song, "Behold, the two brothers have come who weep while chanting Hari's name. The brothers who dance in ecstasy and make the world dance in his name. Behold them, weeping themselves and making the whole world weep as well. The brothers who, in return for blows, often to sinners, Hari's love." The Chaitanya Deva and Nityananda they're usually called brothers. They weren't brothers biologically, but just in a kind of a spiritual sense. Behold, the two brothers have come, who once were Kanai and Balai of Raja. So this is another theory that they have. They identify all of the main figures in the Chaitanya Lila with the main figures in the Krishna Lila. So Gauranga, of course, would be Krishna himself, and his friend Balai will be Balaram, his friend. That'll be Nityananda. They who would steal the butter out of the pots of the gopi maids. Behold, the two have come, who shatter all the rules of caste, embracing everyone as brother, even the outcast shunned by men, who lose themselves in Hari's name, making the whole world mad, who are none other than Hari himself and chant his hallowed name. Yeah, most of the devotional movements were free from this caste distinction. And, many of the Vaishnavas that we meet will have the name Das. And this, I believe, is a kind of a title that many of them took, that they could have been Banerjees and Chatterjees and things like that. But this is a way that nobody will know what their caste is. The same thing with the Sikh tradition. They'll all, in brotherhood, they'll all have the same last name, thing like that.
We also have Goswami, right? Goswami.
That's a different thing. We'll talk about the Goswamis in a minute. Yeah. I'll get to that. That'll come up here. Behold them who saved from their sinful ways the ruffians, Jagai and Madhai. These were two characters who used to go around and make fun of everyone and even beat them up. And they even had Nityananda, they had them bleeding and everything. They beat them and they embraced them as brother and everything. Anyhow, they got converted. They who cannot distinguish between a friend and an enemy. Behold the two brothers, Gaur and Nitai, who come again to save mankind. Jader Hori Bolte. What is, how does it go? Join Noyan Chore. Tader. Anyhow, this song, when I was in India one time, I think at the time of Brahmacharya, there are sessions where we do all this kirtan, singing and dancing and all the songs. This was the one song, and other Vaishnava songs that most of them really got into more than anything else. I was surprised. I don't know why. I somehow didn't think that those who came from Vaishnava families, they would say in the Vaishnava tradition, the Shaktas and the others, they would be more attracted to Sri Ramakrishna. But it's not like that. Maybe the majority came from Vaishnava families, even. But they used to love this song. And so this was the one song that they would sing over and over again and get up and start dancing and everything. Jade Hori Bolte Noyan Jhore Tara Du Bhai Aise Chere. Did you find it? It's there.
I can understand the tears are rolling down.
Yeah. Those who take in the name of Hari Bolte, join, the tears from the eyes. The two brothers have come. Again, the master sang, see how all Nodia is shaking. Nodia means Navadvip, under the waves of Gauranga's love. These are two songs that Thakur sings many, many times. How Thakur learned all of these songs. Remember, he didn't read books and things that he would memorize these songs. What a fantastic memory. How many thousands of songs he must have had committed to memory. Noyan Jhore, Tara Dubhai Aise Chere. Yeah, who dance and cause others to dance also. Yeah, anyhow, it's a very beautiful song. The crowd, with the master in the center, surged toward the temple of Radha Krishna. Only a small number could enter. The rest stood outside the portal and jostled with one another to have a look at Sri Ramakrishna. In a mood of intoxication, he began to dance in the courtyard of the shrine. Every now and then his body stood transfixed in deep samadhi. Now, these are all very, very devout people that really, they're probably feeling that they're seeing Gauranga himself, Chaitanya Dev himself, or at least that Thakur had imbibed that spirit to such an extent. Hundreds of people around him shouted the name of God, and thousands outside caught the strain and raised the cry with full-throated voices. Literally thousands. This is no joke. There's a big open field. The echo traveled over the Ganges, striking a note in the hearts of people in the boats on the holy river, and they too chanted the name of God. When the kirtan was over, Manisen took Sri Ramakrishna and Navadip Goswami into a room and served them with refreshments. Afterwards, Ram M. and the other devotees were also served with the prasad. In the afternoon, the master was sitting in Mani Sen's drawing room with the devotees. Navadvip was also near him. Mani offered the carriage hire to Sri Ramakrishna. According to Ram and the others, the master said, "Why should they accept it from you? They earn money." He became engaged in conversation with Navadvip. Master. Bhakti matured becomes bhava. Now he's going to be talking to them about all of the traditional concepts regarding bhakti yoga that were all recorded based on seeing Chaitanya Deva himself and based on what was written about uh, Radha Krishna Lila, in the many texts that they wrote. Chaitanya Deva, he didn't write a single book after this conversion that he had. He wasn't interested in anything. He wrote that one poem that we have, that one hymn. But his disciples, especially Rupa and Sanatan and Jiva Goswami also, they wrote big books, very scholarly books, and with all categories, how many different types of levels of devotion there are, and physical changes in the body, and moods, and all of these things. And so these are all things that Thakur, he must have heard all of these things. Of course, he's talking from his own experience, but using all the language and all the technical terms. So when they say mahabhava, and prema, these are all technical terms, different levels and stages that one can attain to. And each one will have its own physical manifestations. So bhakti matured becomes a bhava. So bhava, we take that to mean some deep spiritual mood, ecstatic mood, something like that. Next is mahabhava. Mahabhava will just be deeper and stronger. Then prema. Prema would be some fully ecstatic love of God. And last of all is the attainment of God. Gauranga experienced the states of mahabhava and prema. These are rare things. He's mentioning this in particular because we'll see these are not for everyone. He also forgets his body, which is so dear to a man. Gauranga experienced prema. He jumped into the ocean thinking it to be the Jamuna. Now, this is one of the signs that the mind is so filled with this divine Leela, this divine play. In his case, of course, this Radha Krishna play, that when he would be in that mood, he would see everything. He this is in Puri, that he's looking at the ocean but thinking it's the Jamuna, convinced. And this was what happened with Radha, that there's Udipana. She would see the peacock feathers in the dark cloud, and she would be seeing Krishna everywhere, Krishnamai, seeing Krishna everywhere. So this was with the Gauranga. He had that same thing. So he jumped into the ocean, thinking it to be the Jamuna, and practically drowned. They say that the fishermen caught him in their net and reeled him in. And he was a huge size or something like that. Some people, nobody knows exactly how he died. They never found his body or anything. So one theory was that he merged into the image of Jagannath in the temple in Puri. The other is that probably he could have drowned in the ocean because this happened more than one occasion. He would just become unconscious, and seeing the Jamuna, he's thinking, how can I unite with my Krishna? The ordinary jiva does not experience mahabhava or prema. Now, this is very similar to what Thakur says about the ordinary jiva not being able to have the highest types of samadhi, the nirvikalpa samadhi, or if they have it, they can't come back from it. And this is because of this idea of what Thakur calls adhar, that we're all a certain size pitcher. We can only hold a certain amount of water. So the spiritual emotions in these higher states are so strong that the whole system gets shattered, whole nervous system, whole body health, and everything like that. So Thakur says that this mahabhava, these things, they enter into the body like an elephant entering into a small straw hut. It'll just destroy the whole thing. Even Swamiji, when he was in Amarnath, that experience that he had was so overwhelming that it affected his heart, and the blood clot came, everything. Yeah. So we can imagine Sri Ramakrishna with his really fragile body. Not that he had strong health or anything. How he could withstand all of these spiritual emotions and all of these realizations and all of these samadhis. This is one of the best types of proof that we have that he was really a superhuman person. If we want to say avatar, we can say avatar. But for the ordinary jiva to attain to real love of God, however, whatever name we do it, is enough for liberation. We shouldn't think that this means that we'll be deprived of some. Actually, some of these higher states, which bring in this vyakulata, we talk about this all the time. If we look at the life of Radha and even Sri Ramakrishna, how these manifest with this horrible burning sensation in the body, and even blood coming out of the pores, constant weeping. Thakur, he had to remain immersed in water all day long because of that burning sensation in his body. That it was so hot that the Brahmani, when she was there, in order to touch him, to help him move or something, she had to put a cloth in between so that her hand would burn from it. So we shouldn't feel bad that we're not getting these things. This is part of that whole package. If we want to have that highest type of ecstatic joy, then we have to go through this viraha bhava before this milana bhava. That means this the feeling of separation from God, which is tremendous feeling of tremendous anguish. In order to have the deeper that is, and the more anguish we feel, the greater the joy of union with God. So these are reserved for these very rare saintly types of people. We don't need these. We get a little bit of devotion, the whole life can be transformed. So we shouldn't feel like we're missing out on anything.
It reminds me of the stigmata.
Yeah, in the Christian tradition, the many of the saints they would meditate so deeply on Jesus on the cross that they would actually have blood come from their hands. This because he was supposed to have been kind of nailed to the cross that way, and how that power of merging the mind in that image really can affect physically the body, and it changes that way. Yeah, we have examples like that in the tradition of the saints in the Roman Catholic tradition. So Thakur says, the ordinary jiva does not experience mahabhava or prema. He goes only as far as bhava, but Gauranga experienced all three states. Isn't that so? Now he's referring to the earlier three states that we had, that because Thakur had exactly the same thing. No, we did. Yes, sir, that is true. The inmost state, the semi-conscious state, and the conscious state. Master, in the inmost state, he would remain in samadhi, unconscious of the outer world. So Thakur is talking from his own experience. In the semi-conscious state, he could only dance. In the conscious state, he chanted the name of God. Navadvip introduced his son to the master. The young man was a student of the scriptures. He saluted Sri Ramakrishna. Navadvip. He studies the scriptures at home. Previously, one hardly saw a copy of the Vedas in this country. Max Mueller has translated them, so people can now read these books. Yeah, he had a whole team of great pundits. And I don't know if it was actually translation, but he was the first one to actually publish them. And this isn't the Upanishad. This really means Rig Veda and other things. And these were never supposed to be printed. That was not that people were lazy or anything. This was an oral tradition. But because he did that, many people had the opportunity to study them and everything. So it was a great contribution. Max Muller is very highly thought of in India. I remember in Delhi, there's a Max Muller house, Max Muller Bhavan. Huh? Yeah. In Bengal, they call him Moksha Mulla, Max Muller. Max Muller has also. And was it Swamiji, I think, said this, or maybe he himself said that he was a rishi in a previous lifetime. And Swamiji asked him, why don't you go to India? You'll be so highly appreciated there. And he said, I'm afraid I'll give up the body. If I go there, I'll remember my past lives as a rishi, something like that. He was a German origin, descent, but I think lived in England. Yeah, I think they'd moved to England. So anyhow, these would be things that only scholars, not necessarily with such high spiritual ideas that we find in the Upanishads. So more of a scholarly thing. So Thakur said, too much study of the scriptures does more harm than good. So too much. That means that the pundits, sometimes it'll become a craze. It'll become an obsession. There's a study of the scriptures and memorizing verses and going through all the grammar and all the commentaries and everything. It builds a tremendous type of intellect, but not necessarily great devotion, and it's taking time away from spiritual practice. So too much of the scriptures does more harm than good. The important thing is to know the essence of the scriptures. After that, what is the need of books? One should learn the essence and then dive deep in order to realize God. The Divine Mother has revealed to me the essence of the Vedanta. It is that Brahman alone is real and the world illusory. This was a nice incident with Swami Turiyananda, Hari, when he was just a college boy, and he was coming to Sri Ramakrishna. He loved to study and read the Upanishads and everything and studying Vedanta. And Thakur noticed that he hadn't come for a while. So he asked the others, where is that boy, Hari? That nice, very, very disciplined Brahmin boy, Hari. And they said, oh, now he's spending all of his time reading Vedanta. So missing the opportunity to be with Ramakrishna. And then when he saw him, he said to him, well, I hear you're spending all your time studying Vedanta. And he said, yes, sir. And he says, is it anything more than Brahman alone is real and the world is unreal? He said, no, sir. He said, then you know it already. And now you have to practice. Yeah, we shouldn't think that we should not study the scriptures. This Swami Turiyananda, he went through all of the Upanishads. He would read a verse. He would sit and commit it to memory and meditate on it. And verse by verse, he went through all of the Upanishads that way. He was a great, not just scholar, a great thinker, a deep thinker. The essence of the Gita is what you get by repeating the word 10 times. This is what Totapuri told him. The word becomes reversed. It is then tagi, which refers to renunciation. The essence of the Gita is, O man, renounce everything and practice spiritual discipline for the realization of God. But how can we persuade our minds to renounce? Master, you are a Goswami. Okay, so this is the point here. It is your duty to officiate as priest in the temple. You cannot renounce the world. Otherwise, who would look after the temple and its services? You have to renounce mentally. One of the features of the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition is that the gurus are all the householders, and in a kind of unbroken line of descent, they trace themselves back to one of the Goswamis. Yeah, so normally, Advaita Acharya, that'll be the main one, but because the other Goswamis, they didn't marry. They weren't sannyasins, but they didn't marry. I think Vishnu Priya, there's a line that goes through her, and maybe through Nityananda also, but mostly Advaita. I asked Swami Swananji once, because he came from a Goswami family. Yeah, and the Goswamis, so they're the gurus of the tradition. And I asked him once, he said, we don't know exactly, probably Advaita. Yeah, so that was their duty and their obligation. They're very pious people. It wasn't just that they did this to make money or anything. They earned very little money and devoted their lives to spiritual scriptural study and everything like that. But this was the tradition. If they all renounced and became monks, then that tradition would die out. So these were the Kula gurus. Family, it would be a family tradition, and one family would have another family, say a non-Brahmin family would have the Brahmin family, Goswami family, and all of their descendants would be initiated by all of the descendants. It would go one to the other like that. I heard that Swami Swananji's family, uh, it wouldn't have been his father. Father died young, maybe before that. Somebody in the family, they were the gurus for Swami Ashokananda's family. Yeah, they were Dattas. So the Goswamis and Dattas. Uh, and the villages were very close to each other. Yeah. Not only that, but when Swami Swananji was a schoolboy, he lived in the town of Habiganj, not in the village. And Swami Shokananda also lived in the town of Habiganj earlier, not at the same period. But their houses are like 4 houses away. They're on the same block almost. Yeah, yeah. And he ended up being his assistant in San Francisco. That wasn't by chance. I think they thought it would be a nice match, the headquarters. So the Navadip Goswami. Now he's a little inspired by Sri Ramakrishna. He'll renounce everything, call on God and God realization. How can we persuade our minds to renounce? Master, you are a Goswami. It is your duty to officiate as priest in the temple. So there there is a monastic tradition, but it's not so strong. There's Vairagis, and they weren't very highly educated people, simple people, and not in generally in India, the priests are not so highly thought of, and the sannyasins are the ones who were given the greatest honor. In the particular Vaishnava tradition, the Goswamis have more honor, and the others were considered to be kind of ordinary people, and sometimes uh, they didn't keep up the traditions that well and other things. So you cannot renounce the world. Otherwise, who would look after the temple and its service? You have to renounce mentally. It is God Himself who has kept you in the world to set an example to men. You may resolve in your mind 1,000 times to renounce the world, but you will not succeed. God has given you such a nature that you must perform your worldly duties. Krishna said to Arjuna, "What do you mean you will not fight? By your mere will, you cannot desist from fighting. Your very nature will make you fight." Yeah, now this is also an interesting idea because we've spoken so many times about uh, this idea of free will and to what extent are we bound by our nature and our samskaras and things like that. If we look at it in Gita, we find that Sri Krishna seems to make a distinction between the samskaras. These samskaras are just tendencies that we have, and these samskaras uh, we can we can change them. We can suddenly give them a new twist and a new direction. There are many aspects of our personality and everything through our spiritual practice that we can change. We're born with certain tendencies and certain bad habits and things that we can change all of these things. But he seemed to hold this idea, which we find in Gita, that there's something a little more elementary, a little more uh, fixed in our personality, which is called swabhava or even prakriti. So in all these verses in the Gita, your nature itself uh, will make you uh, fight in the battle because you're kshatriya. So the swabhava is connected a lot with caste for some reason. Yeah. So that kshatriya is born a kshatriya because there's something in his nature that will not change very easily that makes him heroic. something in the nature of a Brahmin that makes him calm and peaceful. And if one tries to do the dharma of the other, it won't work. So this was the dilemma that Sri Krishna, he wanted to live the dharma of a Brahmin or of a sannyasin, to renounce everything. And he had the swabhava of a kshatriya. So it wouldn't work. Now, Thakur accepts this also with regard to a couple of things. One will be, say, this idea of who is meant to be a householder. And the other will be who has a little bit of the nature of Shiva and the nature of Vishnu. That those who are born with the nature of a devotee. He said it's so much ingrained in them that it's not something that one should even try to change. Whereas if we're born and part of our nature is that we're bad-tempered, we have that samskara, that we can change. That's a different type of thing. So they're very subtle kind of distinction. So when he was talking to Vijay Krishna Goswami, he became a Brahmo, but it was a bad fit. And Thakur said, look, you're born in the family of great bhaktas, great devotees. Goswami, in this tradition, same tradition, that it won't do to try to squeeze yourself into the box of the Brahmos. That devotion it runs through your very veins. You were born with it. You come from that family and everything. You were born into that family for a reason. And as soon as Vijay left the Brahmo Samaj, and he renounced everything, and this devotion really blossomed forth within him, he became considered a great saint. He had a big following. There are a lot of books written about him and everything. So, partly there are certain parts of our nature that we should accept and take advantage of. This is what Swamiji means when he says the path of least resistance. So we should find that why should we keep hitting our heads against the wall, trying to be I am he? That if it's not something that's suited to our nature and everything, we're better.
Swamiji, why is there so much resistance against the varnas that they had before? Like the 4 varnas that
Right.
they had. People were really criticized in India, and that was one of the main reasons. Everybody criticizes it.
Yeah, the caste system. If we take it to be perfectly in sync with the theory of karma, then each person who is born into a particular caste, it is not that that person is forced to do the duties of that caste, but they're qualified for it, and it works. It fits for them. This is one thing. Second thing is that Swamiji believed, or at least he struggled with this idea. He believed that in the beginning that it probably wasn't hereditary.
Wasn't?
That no, and that was a big issue with him. You read in his letters to this Pramada Das Mitra, who was a great scholar, asking him all of the time, was this a hereditary thing? When did it happen like that? So Swamiji felt, and with a good reason, that probably, and he used to talk about it, something like guilds that they had in Europe, that even in this country with the unions, that there'll be certain immigrant communities that take to one trade and some that take to a different trade and everything. I remember I had a summer job with the bricklayers in Philadelphia, and they were all German Americans. You think after so many years, how much would it change? And all the laborers were African Americans and me. I didn't last long at that job. It was too hard. But it's curious. So anyhow, the Swamiji felt the caste system is not so bad if it's just organizing society, and if one could switch from one to another. And there was intermarriage in caste in the early days. We know that. There were mixed castes, the Sudras and other things like that. So Swamiji felt that when it got so restrictive, so that you were born in that caste, you had to marry into that caste, you couldn't die, and privilege, when privilege came into it, that because the one belonged to a high caste, they had privilege over the others, then he didn't like it at all. Towards the end of his life, he didn't try to defend it in any way. He said this caste is the main problem that we have. Yeah. Because we find, I mean, as much as theoretically it makes sense, in practical terms, we know that there are people who were born into the lowest possible caste, who are brilliant and perfectly qualified to be scientists and doctors and whatever, and that there'll be people who are born as Brahmins who are qualified to work with their hands and all sorts of things. So the theory and practice don't jive all of the time. So that's the main difficulty when people are deprived of the opportunity to pursue any type of profession or career outside of the limitations of caste. Then it's very restrictive. And in the beginning, everyone was supposed to have the equal respect because they were all playing their part in society. So Swamiji always said that the role of the workers is equally important and is sacred, equally sacred as those who are teachers or doctors or anything else.
So when did it get also muddled and changed the way it is right now, which is terrible?
Yeah, it's very hard to say. It's very hard to say. Of course, now it's not as bad as it once was. I mean, it's a form officially outlawed. Now, it mostly, as far as I know, it's mostly with regard to marriage and other things. But people eat with each other and everything. I mean, at one time it was really horrible. That if someone from a Shudra or outcast, if they walked on your shadow, or if their shadow touched your body, yeah, then they could be punished, and you'd have to go home and take a bath and everything. So yeah, it was pretty bad at one time. But
Swamiji,
yeah.
one question.
Yeah.
So now that we don't believe in the hereditary transmission of caste, how do we find out if our nature is like a Kshatriya or a Shudra or
Yeah, so now actually it was much easier in the early days when we knew what our dharma was. There's a big question: how do we know what our dharma is? How do we know what is the best career path to take? Yeah, now it becomes a big issue that we have to think about very deeply, and it's a question of what appeals to us and what we're qualified for, like everything else, huh? It's a question of uh, adhikara, what are we fit to do, and what appeals to us. So the same thing with in our spiritual life. Thakur always said that this question of taste, that the mother gives the child the type of food that it likes to eat and that it can digest. So the same thing, we have to find what will bring some joy and satisfaction to our lives, and we have to be realistic. And this is something that I can do. This is something I'm qualified to do.
Well, are we given that option in spiritual life, that we can choose the path that we feel suitable for ourselves?
We can, yeah, we're given the option, or the guru will help us see what path is best for us. So there were times when devotees would go to Holy Mother, and she would say, "My child, what aspect of God do you like, for your initiation?" And they would say something, and she would meditate or think for a while, and she would say, "No, this is more suited for you." And they'd be a little surprised they hadn't thought about it. And after a while, they would come back and say, "Mother, how did you know that you were right? This is the best thing for me." Of course, these are the special gurus who will do that. So, yeah. So it was very easy when we were told, perform your duty in a spirit of selflessness and not looking to the fruits, and we would know exactly what the duties were because these are all written out in the scriptures. The kshatriya has certain duties, and yeah, you join the army, and that's the last decision you make. You do what they tell you to do, and you do it as out of a sense of obligation and duty, and through that one can attain the highest. This is what Gita says, whatever our duty is. Now it becomes a real issue how to decide what to do.
But Swamiji, by that, the physicians are Shudras. Because the service people, no, seriously,
Yeah.
Shudras considered Shudras. Remember that
Yes.
in Kankan, the Swamis of our order, they were called Bhangi Swamis.
Yes.
Because they were serving people around
Yes.
in the hospital.
Yeah.
So actually, they say that if by that we are lowest of the low.
Yeah. Actually, in the early days, the sannyasins played the role, especially in the Buddhist tradition. Yeah, they were kind of the healers, and they would do that kind of thing. Yeah. So yeah.
When you think of the irony of the people that work the cremation grounds, and they're providing a service that helps the
Yes.
soul go to
Yeah.
the afterlife.
Yeah. So Swamiji said, you look down on these people. You won't. But he said, if the garbage collectors in Calcutta stop work for one day, that everything will fall apart. And if you big shots, you don't go to work for a month, nobody will know the difference. Right? And yet you look down upon these people. Yeah.
That's why Thakur went to Sikhs.
Yes. Yeah. So all of these great saints, Chaitanya, Thakur, and everything, in fact, this idea that Thakur had that there's no caste among devotees of God. This was from Chaitanya Deva. That was their tradition. They believe that was one of their
But in
tenets.
India, they're doing a good job, Swamiji, by reserving seats for, the backward people.
Yeah.
To bring them up to at par, and also
Yeah.
educate them.
Yeah. No, there was a very vigorous policy in India for what did they call it here?
Affirmative action.
Affirmative action. Thank you. Affirmative action. Yeah.
There's a word in Hindi also, they say.
Yeah. Okay, let's get back to this. So, at the mere mention of Krishna and Arjuna, the master went into samadhi. In the twinkling of an eye, his body became motionless and his eyeballs transfixed, while his breathing could scarcely be noticed. At this sudden transformation, Navadvip and his son and the other devotees looked at the master in mute wonder. Regaining partial consciousness, he said to Navadvip, "Yoga and bhoga. You Goswamis have both." Now, yoga, because they were pious people. They worked in the temple. They would give the initiation. They were pious people. Bhoga, not that they were materialistic or anything like that, but they were also family people, and they had their simple enjoyments and things like that. So he was telling them, don't try to give up. This is part of your nature. Now your only duty is to call on God and pray to him sincerely. Now, there's no reason why these Goswamis, as they get older in life, can't slowly devote their whole life to spiritual pursuit. This is what Thakur is telling everybody, householders, non-householders, everybody. So now your only duty is to call on God and pray to him sincerely. "O God, I don't want the glories of thy world bewitching Maya." That means I'm not so fascinated with the world anymore. All of its bubbles and shiny things and everything, they don't appeal to me anymore. "I want thee alone. God dwells in all beings undoubtedly. That being the case, who may be called his devotees? He who dwells in God, he who has merged his mind and life and innermost soul in God." Yeah, one of my favorite verses from Gita is in chapter 12, that says, who is it who lives in God? Huh? He said, if you give your mind to me, place your intellect in me, fix your mind in me, all of that, then you'll dwell in me for all time. Huh? We want to know that where do we have to go? How do we do it? Wherever the mind is. We're reading these letters of Swami Atmajnanananda, and he talked about this Ramakrishna Loka as after we give up this body that we'll go there. But he's telling them, look, if you everything is Thakur, your whole body, mind, soul, everything given to him, then right here and now you're living in Ramakrishna Loka. So this is all the question of the mind. Moni ekota, Thakur uses this expression over and over and over again. It's all the question of the mind. If the mind is in bliss, we're in bliss. If the mind is thinking of God, we're dwelling in God. Say God is so far away because we're not thinking of God. We feel the presence within the heart. We're living in God. So the beautiful statement, he who dwells in God, who has merged his mind and life and innermost soul in God, he is called a devotee. The master returned to the sense plane. So he's in this ecstatic mood. Some of the most beautiful teachings that we get are when Thakur is in that in-between mood. He goes into samadhi, then he comes down a little bit, but he's not in that ordinary state of consciousness. Still, that divine inebriation is there, and these words spontaneously come out. So the master returned to the sense plane, referring to his samadhi. He said to Navadvip, some say that this state of mind is a disease. This was mostly the Shivnath Shastri and some of the Brahmos. They said, yes, he's a very nice man, but this samadhi thing, that there must be something wrong. There's too much thinking of God, and he's behead. He's lost his head somehow. But Thakur didn't mind. Shivnath, he knew that he would say those things, and still he loved him so much. And he would say, oh, Shivnath, you've come. What is this you say? That I've lost my head, that I've gone mad. So referring to his samadhi, he said in Navadvip, some say that this state of mind is a disease. I say to them, how can one become unconscious by thinking of him whose consciousness has made the whole world conscious? Mani Sen said goodbye to the invited Brahmins and Vaishnavas with suitable gifts of money. He offered 5 rupees to Sri Ramakrishna. Now, he couldn't touch money. He couldn't save money. Actually, there was an exception. You know that, huh? That this man who couldn't touch money and couldn't bear the thought of it, and to him gold was the whole symbol of greed and everything, the worst possible thing. He made sure that money was collected and set aside for Holy Mother. One was to get bangles made for her, and the other was after he passed away, so there would be money. He made sure that was done. So look at that love for Holy Mother, to go against such a strict rule for him. He offered 5 rupees to Sri Ramakrishna. The latter said that he could not possibly accept any money, but Mani insisted. Money doesn't mean money. Money is his name. The master then asked him in the name of his guru not to press him. Mani requested him again to accept the offering. Sri Ramakrishna asked M in a distressed voice whether he should take the money. The disciple, money's money. The disciple made a vehement protest and said, no, sir, by no means. Because M knew how important this was to Sri Ramakrishna, and how childlike he was, and how easily people could force him to do things. His mind was very simple that way. People told him, take this medicine, and say, okay, I'll try it. So, all sorts of things. So M is being very protective of him at this time. Friends of Mani Sen gave the money to Rakal, requesting him to buy some mangoes and sweets for the master. Sri Ramakrishna said to M, I have definitely said to Mani that I would not accept the money. I feel free now, but Rakal has accepted it. His is now the responsibility. There was a similar incident where a large amount of money was offered to Sri Ramakrishna, and he said, no, I can't accept it. So then they said, okay, we'll give it to Holy Mother. And Holy Mother said, no, my accepting it will be as good as him having it also. So I also can't accept it because he won. And Thakur was so happy. He said, see how intelligent Holy Mother is. That she knew if she took it, it would be the same thing as me taking it. Sri Ramakrishna, accompanied by the devotees, took a carriage to return to Dakshineshwar. They were going to pass the temple garden of Mati Shil on the way. You'll remember this came up earlier. For a long time, the master had been asking M to take him to the reservoir in the garden in order that he might teach him how to meditate on the formless God. There were tame fish in the reservoir. Nobody harmed them. Visitors threw puffed rice and other bits of food into the water, and the big fish came in swarms to eat the food. Fearlessly, the fish swam in the water and sported there joyously. You see this sometimes in these Japanese gardens, the thing with the koi fish, and people will feed them, and they all run around in big circles and spin around. Coming to the reservoir, the master said to him, "Look at the fish. Meditating on the formless God is like swimming joyfully like these fish in the ocean of bliss and consciousness." Okay, that is the end of that day. Let's stop here. Om Niranjanam Nityamanantarupam Bhaktanukamбхатудvikraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamidya Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namo. We bow our heads before Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, of infinite nature, whose heart melts in sympathy for his devotees, who is an embodiment of the divine and the Supreme Lord, and ever worthy of our worship. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us.